And welcome back to The World Today. What a great panel that was for the protagonists, and appreciate all the nice comments too. And for that commercial, that actually is a public service. So if someone says, "What are you doing?" that's for your health, okay, and my amusement. So it wins both ways. Bottoms up, as they would say. Anyway. Back to some normality now. We're going to talk about Bondi's political impact of the terrible atrocity. Jordan Dittloff is a law graduate and works in civil litigation. Now, formerly Federal Secretary of the Libertarian Party, Jordan worked to help guide the party through the challenges of constitutional and structural reform and the adoption of its new party name. Jordan maintains a keen interest in policy and in legislation before the Parliament. Now, we're going to talk to Jordan about the impact of the Bondi murders, what it had on our country, but also the longer term impact of this event on Australian politics. We've seen Anthony Albanese get off lightly, and he has, despite an appalling lack of leadership, and Susan Ley, the opposition leader, becoming a victim of her own actions in supporting bad and rushed legislation. She's a shocker, isn't she? How much went on behind the scenes in crafting the legislation, and whose ends does it ultimately serve? And above it all is, well, we have Pauline Hanson. Please explain. Sitting pretty. Don't know about that. But what exactly has she done but play what constitutes safe politics? Jordan, thanks for joining me.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me again. You're looking very well rested. I hope you enjoyed the Christmas and New Year's break.
I worked.
All your viewers and their families had the same.
I worked. No rest for the wicked.
I was much the same. So, birds of a feather, I suspect.
But it's very interesting how we've moved down this path, and we have one nation rearing its head, saying, "Oi, I could be Prime Minister." How has since Bondi, how has Australia, in your mind, changed?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting question because I watched the Pauline Hanson, the very progressive movie yesterday for the first time, and I thought it was quite good. It gave me a bit of a chuckle. It was definitely had a message, and that message was obviously that Pauline Hanson, One Nation, is the solution to all the problems that ail the nation. I probably wouldn't go that far in my assessment, but it was a very funny movie, and I think what we are seeing. So basically, I one of the reasons I was working all through the Christmas and New Year's break was because I now do some contracting work for the Free Speech Union, and as you can imagine, unfortunately, it has been a very busy time for an organisation dedicated to trying to protect Australians against the encroachments of censorship and terrible knee-jerk policy responses that basically attack our rights and our civil liberties and free speech. And unfortunately, sadly, watching the events of Bondi unfold, I could have been, if I was a betting man, very, very confident in getting some returns on a bet that government's response would be pretty well pre-drafted and preconceived. Governments are always looking for a good crisis or tragedy as a pretext for things that they want to do. And basically what we've seen is, unfortunately, very unsurprising. We've seen governments respond to what is undoubtedly an incredibly tragic and terrible event that I know all Australians from any walk of life, any race, religion or creed should condemn. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is a really opportunistic attempt by both major parties. We had the Liberal Party calling on the Albanese government to actually reconvene Parliament even earlier than they did. So they were calling on them to do that before the Christmas break. In the end, they were recalled for the Monday and Tuesday, the 18th and 19th of January, federally. But we've also seen, in addition to those really terrible federal laws, which I'm sure we'll talk about, we've also seen responses at the state level in New South Wales, where the New South Wales state government has called on their Law and Safety Committee to consider explicitly the approaches taken in the UK as a response to, first the Bondi massacre and the events that led up to it, but then now there's a new inquiry they've called for into combating right-wing extremism. I've spent most of today drafting and getting a submission ready by the Free Speech Union into this new inquiry. So very quickly, all of a sudden, we've pivoted from radical Islamic terrorism, resulting in the deaths of 15 people and horrible injuries, direct injuries, and psychological injuries and injuries to the community from that attack being the work of Islamic radicals, to now suddenly we're talking about combating right-wing extremism, and it's all very convenient. It almost feels like they were disappointed that the perpetrators of this attack had Islamic surnames rather than surnames like Smith and Sewell and Davis. It's obviously not the terror attack they were hoping for. It might sound like a terrible thing to say, but you can't escape that conclusion. And yeah, I think that one thing I have observed that I think is a very positive thing to have come out of a very dark event is the way in which the rise of minor parties like One Nation, and now the fact that One Nation is providing competition and really, I suppose, waiting under the ice for it to break, particularly for the Nationals and the Liberal Party, where the ALP thought they had this free kick. They thought that this, omnibus bill, this 144-page piece of legislation, which, as you say, was written in what seemed to me to be less than a week, so badly drafted that you could see missing grammar and syntax errors and all sorts of things in a bill that originally, in its original form, which Labor expected to be just rushed through to the keeper, which Liberal would have done, and then suddenly you had One Nation turn around and say, no, we're not going to vote for it. And in fact, we think it's terrible legislation and we'll campaign against the Nationals and the Liberals and so forth if they do support it. And suddenly you've seen this force of political competition achieve a backflip amongst the major opposition parties, so that instead of just waving through what the Albanese government had originally proposed, which they were very much prepared to do, suddenly now you have this really dynamic, really fast-moving situation where you've got negotiations between multiple parties, you've got a lot of media, a lot of pressure being put on major parties to actually do their job and to oppose. And so in a kind of an indirect way, we've seen One Nation basically put the cat amongst the pigeons. And, even though, I'm not a member and supporter of One Nation, and ultimately I think that there are some challenges and some risks down the track that they might end up repeating some of these mistakes. I think the fact that we're starting to see the fracturing of the two-party duopoly is undoubtedly a positive thing.
Yeah, I'm just. I looked at what Chris Minns said, I think about a week ago, and he said, "Free speech is what government lets you say." Basically, you would have been appalled with that because it's gone from one to another extreme. How the hell will what I say affect how will it impact society? I mean, all it is, I truly I see this like the e-safety bill. I see it as a way of controlling you and me and everybody else. And if you say hurty words, and already people are being called by the federal police for things they could have said and are quite legal and quite fair. If I were to criticise Netanyahu or the Israeli government or the IDF, who, by the way, have admitted that 70,000 people were killed by the IDF. So, and that's not, that's that's a fact. But I can get charged for that. I can get a call from the federal police, and they would tell me that this is bordering, if not, it is hate speech.
Yeah, well, it's ironic that even before these new laws are passed, we've just seen a controversial Israeli commentator refused a visa to travel to Australia to speak at Australian Jewish Association events. So the very first kind of use of not even these new laws, which have strengthened the power of the minister to do these kinds of things, but on the eve of these laws being rushed through Parliament, essentially, we're reminded that even the existing laws can and will be used against the very people that these social cohesion, anti-Semitism provisions are meant to protect. So, and it was the same with 18C. You saw, it was passed to stop all this, hate preaching and all that sort of thing, and then it was used against Andrew Bolt and Pauline Hanson. They're like, inevitably, unfortunately, it is often, aspects and elements of the right that can kind of cheer on this kind of legislation as an anti-radical Islam provision or as an anti-whatever the cause of the day or justification might be, to sort of achieve social cohesion or to protect the community. But then inevitably, laws that you see passed and cheer on will be used by people you disagree with to support causes you hate. It's just the nature of the beast. The government is a sledgehammer and everything's nail, and they will find ways to expand and use these powers far beyond the scope the powers were originally conceived for. And there's particular insult to injury with a lot of this stuff too, because, like as you say, the sort of hate speech provisions and these prohibited hate group rules, the laws that passed federally are not as bad as they were going to be. There had originally been a provision in these laws that would have really brought about a regime functionally equivalent to the regime we see in the UK, where it's an offence under the Public Order Act to stir up racial division and racial hatred, or racial or religious hatred. It's been amended to now. And this incite racial hatred provision that was going to be inserted into the criminal code federally would have done that. Fortunately, we avoided that extra incitement of hatred offence in its own right. But what we still have is this prohibited hate group legislation. And Anne Toomey, who I'm not sure if you've had the pleasure to meet before or are aware of, she's a very revered, esteemed sort of constitutional law academic here in Australia, and she has a fantastic podcast where she actually went through the effect of this prohibited hate group legislation, which is basically that the AFP minister can say any group they think is a hate group will be so. Essentially, you don't need convictions for any hate crimes to have been recorded. You don't need any procedural fairness. These things are explicitly not required in the bill. They say we don't need these things. And once a group is designated a prohibited hate group, then being a member of that group, supporting that group, and being a member is a very loose definition. It's not just a financial member, someone seeking to join, someone who's a lay member, someone who's supporting that entity, someone who's literally, according to the definition of the Act, providing support to that entity to continue existing. So you have a world in which a lot of legal professionals would be very, very, very reluctant to provide legal advice to a group that was being designated a prohibited hate group, because it's difficult to see how essentially helping them navigate the legal system is not helping them to continue to exist. And then you've got another framework which allows the AFP minister to basically say, well, one of the things that happened before this bill was even passed was the National Socialist Network was one of the main targets of this bill. You would have to agree. They said, oh, look, we're disbanding. So we're actually not in existence anymore. We're going to disappear and go the way of the dodo. Well, this bill also provides that if a future organisation was to be come into existence in future, and maybe it's a political party, maybe it's the White Australia Party, which the National Socialist Network was attempting and by all accounts quite close to getting the numbers to create. Let's say the White Australia Party essentially arises and applies for registration with the AEC. Well, the AFP minister can say, we believe that the White Australia Party is an alias for the National Socialist Network, who we say is a prohibited hate group. Therefore, the White Australia Party is now a prohibited hate group. So to describe these laws as draconian or as kind of chilling in terms of where they put the Overton window of debate, it's unclear to me that these laws couldn't be used to designate a group like March for Australia, who are carrying out immigration rallies around the country and seeking to debate the right level of migration, the makeup of migration, even remigration. It's unclear to me that an organisation like that couldn't be made a prohibited hate group simply by wanting to discuss these issues. And it's also unclear, and it's unclear to Professor Toomey as well, that a party like One Nation couldn't be designated as a prohibited hate group. So, these laws are like this bill that passed was, and I say this without exaggeration, the worst piece of legislation I've ever seen in over 20 years of following politics and about 7 pursuing legal training and being a law graduate. It's just we're reaching a point where essentially it's going to be unlawful to disagree with the orthodox view, and that's a very, very dangerous place to enter into, not just for the Jewish community in Australia, but for all Australians.
It's a shocker, but you'd always look to the opposition, which are the Conservatives, which are for your individual rights and freedom of speech. And then you look at Susan Ley. She was once known as Ley, but became woke, so it's called Ley. I don't know why, anyway. And you look at her partnership with Albanese, and if you go back probably about 3 months ago, 4 months ago maybe, the shadow, I can't think of her name, the shadow minister for Communications said that government have to control the internet. So what we have both sides, and that's where I think Pauline Hanson is kicking goals. She's still down. You have a right to say what you need to say. It's your inherent right to have free speech. Do you think the Conservatives will? I mean, they talk about new leader Andrew Hastie or Angus, whatever his name is. I think of a cow when I mention his name. But do you think they will come back to the fold and start pushing individual rights, a smaller government out of your business, and things like that? Or do you think they've swallowed this Kool-Aid and they're on this path leading Australia to obliteration?
Yeah, well, I think that we've already seen that one other consequence of this competition from one nation is that we've seen the Nationals now leave the coalition. So the coalition is no more. We've had a divorce in the opposition. And one of the reasons for that is that essentially One Nation has, they've been polling in some places above 20%. That's going to be very unevenly distributed throughout the country. But the places they're polling the best are where they have National Party incumbents in these regional seats. And the Nationals know that unless they, as you say, sort of return to the fold and start to represent conservative values or even classical liberal values, One Nation's going to be living in their houses before too long. So it's the natural forces of competition, and whether you agree with everything One Nation argues or does or whatever is sort of beside the point. The fact of competition, the forces of political competition, is an absolute good. And I think that in Australia, I was having a chat recently with Cos Samaras, who you may be aware of. He and I have very different views about how politics should be in Australia, but when it comes to observing trends and things like that, his analysis is often quite on the money. And the problem that the Liberals have, as in the Liberal Party, not the Liberal National Coalition, the problem the Liberals have is that they need to win seats in urban centres. So in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, Sydney, particularly the outer western suburbs in both places, the southeast suburbs as well in Melbourne. These are places, and the inner city are places where they essentially need to win seats in order to win government, whether in their own right or in coalition with the Nationals or anyone else. And I actually don't agree with the proposition that classical liberal values, that being pro-business, being small government, all this sort of things, it's kind of become accepted wisdom that those ideas are sort of somehow out of fashion, or that it's not possible to win a majority in government with those ideas, whether it be climate change, whether it be nuclear energy, whether it be whatever the whole gamut of issues are. And I think the problem isn't that the Liberal Party have tried those things and it didn't work. I think it's that they have basically not shown leadership at all, and that they're sort of this weather vane where they're trying to basically provide opposition on the run. They're sort of still developing policy by focus group. They're not getting out in front of the people and proposing an actual coherent opposition narrative. They're not providing leadership. And more than anything, that's what people are looking for. And they were looking for it with Peter Dutton in the federal election. They found him wanting. They're looking for it with Susan Ley, and I think they're finding it even less so again. And so I really think that until the Liberal Party actually sort of get over this identity crisis and remember their roots and remember the founding values, the vision statement of Menzies that they supposedly still adhere to, until they sort of remember who they are, to sort of quote the Lion King, I think that they are going to be in the wilderness for a very long time, and they may even not continue to exist in less than a decade. I think that's very possible. And I'll be completely honest with you, Mike, and I know many of your listeners might not agree with me here, but at the moment, the way things are tracking, I don't think that would be a bad thing. I think that that we need to let the political evolution and political Darwinism take its course, and if the Libs can't get their act together, and it's going to be parties like One Nation, parties like the Libertarians, and others who sort of inherit the ashes and sort of phoenix from the sort of legacy of the Liberal Party. Well, I don't think that's a bad thing at all, because it certainly it's not clear to me that at the moment, if Susan Ley were swept to power at the next federal election that we'd really be noticing that much of a difference.
Interesting, because in the UK, Nigel has had many defections from the Tories, and they're moving over to Reform UK. However, having said that, I don't like Nigel, by the way. I think he's a showman, celebrity game show host in waiting. But having said that, he fails to understand that the Tories were smashed, and by bringing all the Tories over, he's in fact, many have said,
Yes.
we're getting Tories Mark II.
Well, you hit to the heart of it, Mike, and I think we've got. So James Ashby is saying there's going to be some exciting announcements for One Nation on Monday, and they're talking about
becomes conservative.
Colin Boyce from the Nationals might be making his way there under the cover of a failed leadership attempt or whatever. But I think you're going to see the same kind of phenomenon happen, where I think that rats always flee a sinking ship, but you should remember that it's better to have rats than nothing, but they're still rats. You know what I mean? So I know that's a bit of I know I come on here and I say some sort of outrageous things sometimes, but
good.
I do think you will see, and I think that One Nation should be very careful because they're going to find their tent grows very rapidly, but it's not going to necessarily be the best of people that come to them first.
What did they say? Be careful what you wish for.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
The Australian Democrats might be a testament to that principle as well.
Yeah, I think so. Jordan, if somebody wants to find out more about what you do, how to get in contact with you and whatever, how do they do that?
Absolutely. So all of my socials, conveniently now, it's at Dittloff, the number 4. So Dittloff, 2 T's, 2 F's, 4, the number 4, cents. And that's on Instagram, X, Facebook, and now YouTube as well.
YouTube, I can't stand them. I mean, our numbers, because they go after us because they don't like us, but we've actually seen our numbers drop and just get pushed down. 1 minute it'll have X amount and then it would drop. So what it looks like is that we have no one's watching you, but they are. And we had that with TNT Radio, the same thing. We worked out that we had, for 1 year, we had 140 million viewers. That's not too bad. But at one stage we had our app, and it had 500,000 for that month had used it, just to watch YouTube come through the app, and YouTube said we had 3. So anyway, who knows?
Yeah, well, look, all you can do is you just got to keep the beacons lit and be confident that your audience is out there. And I'm always happy to join you for these chats.
Thanks. We have a very good audience. And one day we'll find out the numbers. Jordan, thank you so much for your time. This is The World Today.
What is Australia's deadliest predator? The one that hits with more than 30 Gs of force, strikes in under a second, leaves catastrophic injury in its wake. You won't hear it, you won't see it, not until it's too late. Australia's deadliest predator isn't found in the wild. It's on our roads. Speeding is the killer.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Welcome back to The World Today for our final 20 minutes, and a very important 20 minutes too. We're going to talk about a situation in Australia that is just in your face. And what I'm seeing, it stresses me, but Shane Healey, he'll be able to maybe put us to ease or suggest what we can do about it. We're going to talk about youth crime and is it out of control in Australia? I think it is at the moment. Shane Healey is a terrorism and youth justice expert. It's very important, the youth justice expert. He's a former ADF Forces Special Operations Command intelligence operator and private military contractor. Shane has been deployed twice to Afghanistan in 2011 and 2012, part of Task Force 66, where he provided insurgent threat assessments. When in Australia, he was part of the Tactical Assault Group East and West, where he was involved in several real-time terrorist incidents. we're going to talk to Shane today about the youth crime in Australia and what we're doing wrong. Shane, what are we doing wrong? And I know you and I have spoken about this a number of times, but just last night on the Gold Coast, where they have surfboards and waves and sharks, here was a group of young guys. One had a gun trying to kick in the door.
So I also need to caveat your listeners with, I have worked in New South Wales Youth Justice in the high risk area. So I've worked, that's how I am across the youth justice space. So one of the two issues is there's nothing for youth to do. I know a lot of work in the communities with at-risk offenders now through my nonprofit. And when I was a kid in a country town in Western New South Wales, you had the PCYC, but you also had consequences for your actions. So the two people you were scared of, in my case, it was my Aboriginal gran and then the local police agent who actually had the ability to give you a kick in the bum. That's all gone in the last 10, 15 years. Teachers are scared to discipline kids at school. Kids just grow up with no consequences, and the judicial system doesn't help. One of the biggest shocks that I got when I started working at Youth Justice, the kids we actually had in custody, or the youth offenders, were actually on like their 10th, 11th, 12th charge. So when they first get in trouble and go before the youth courts or the juvenile courts, they actually just get pretty much a slap on the wrist. So there's that problem. But the biggest issue that I see, especially in our lower socio-economical communities, is when I was at Youth Justice, they did a survey, especially of all the Indigenous kids in custody and community care. If we could do one thing to make you feel safe at home, what would it be? And the answer was put a lock on your bedroom door. So a lot of these kids are roaming the streets because they're actually too scared to go home. And that's from, alcohol, drug, violence. If we can fix that problem, then a lot of these kids are going to be...
We have a really bad connection right now. We'll keep trying because so is it then the fault of bad parents that the kids are running around the street? And I see in Victoria where they had a list, I think it's 660 kids who were part of gangs and stuff, who were the main perpetrators. I think that's what the Chief Commissioner said just recently. So is it the fault of the parents, or is it just the fault of society?
So it's neither. You can't say it's the fault of the parents if they're struggling themselves. And that's what I'm talking about with these lower socioeconomic areas and higher crime rates. So gangs have been around since, the 70s in youth. It's one of the ways they identify themselves. They gravitate to cliques. Like in Sydney, the most famous is the Bra Boys. It's always been there. It's always going to be there. Youth gravitating clans. What we're seeing, Bud, is the escalation of violence. Part of that is our adult, like our OMCGs and other organised crimes, are using juveniles to do their bidding for them because of the lighter sentence. And the juveniles want to commit the crime because they want cash, they want the flashy lifestyle. So it's not really a parent's problem, because in a lot of ways we've taken the ability of parents to discipline their kids away from them.
We are having some trouble. Yep, I think it's important that we can try and get through this. So tell me this, Shane. We've had a lot of emphasis on weapons, buyback schemes, and in Victoria they had the machete bins and stuff. These people that have machetes or who have guns, and I saw a clip last night on the Gold Coast. These sort of schemes that they're bringing out by government schemes such as buyback and machete in bin schemes, are they going to work? Because if you want a gun or you want to have a machete or a big bloody knife, a law's not going to stop you because you're going to commit a crime. We've frozen?
100%. Those that carry guns and knives are going to commit crime. And can you hear me, Mike?
What we might do, Shane, we just got some, we had some issues.
Are you there?
And yeah, we can just about, I'm going to go to a quick commercial break and see if we can fix this up. This is The World Today.
Biodiversity is life. Our forests, grasslands, deserts, waterways, estuaries, coastlines, coral reefs and oceans are all living ecosystems, our planetary life support systems. These living ecosystems are ancient synergistic tapestries woven over billions of years, long before the advent of agriculture, housing, mining, energy systems and infrastructure. Now, the remnants of these ancient ecosystems stand under relentless siege from large-scale renewable energy infrastructure and critical minerals mining. The scale of this is so vast that it will sweep across our beautiful country and will leave a lasting legacy of sterile wastelands and add to the climate catastrophe. So, dear humanity, this is our plea. Let the guardianship of wild places rise above the false messaging of lobby groups that campaign for mining and industrialization of wild places as sustainable and green on behalf of profit-driven renewable energy corporations and investors. Destroying the remnant functioning biosphere, the ecosystems and habitats, is no climate solution. These are habitats that are home to the tremendous diversity of birds, mammals, reptiles, insects, fungi and plants that we call biodiversity, and these are natural climate regulators. Once they're gone forever. The clock is ticking, and it's only seconds before midnight. But it's still not too late to stop this onslaught destroying Australia's remaining unique wild places and biodiversity that we cherish and love for now and for future generations.
And back again. We've had a few connection issues in the last 20 minutes, and it was very, very interesting and I think very important that we discuss these, because Shane is very well qualified, and we will revisit this next week because I think it's very important. I was going to talk to Jordan Dittloff before, but we ran out of time. Could have stayed on. Anyway, about Jacinta Allen, Premier Jacinta Allen. She's a shocker, but could very well get back in government in Victoria. The state opposition, very much like the federal opposition, is just woeful, to say the least. So one of the things Jacinta Allen is going on about is that the big bushfires they had in Victoria, and then the rainfall in Wye River on the coast, it's a perfect example that climate change is real. And I think it's a con job. Or she would have to be the stupidest, most idiotic, besides Chris Bowen, of course, and Albanese. Oh, there were a lot of them. Anyway, she's there, a conga line of idiots. That's what they are. And she says, there you are. That's what climate change is all about. It is real. Well, first of all, climate change was not about the bushfires. Perhaps if you did your back burning properly and stuff like that, but sometimes a bolt of lightning or someone with a matchbox and lights fires, that's not climate change. And then we have Wye River. It's a summer storm, okay? It's a summer, it is not friggin' climate change. So I thought I would play this infamous clip, the one that brought me joy. I was walking around like a stormtrooper at one stage, haven't shut up about it. And then we'll tag it with something that will debunk what this buffhead or this scammer is saying.
We also then had the enormous flooding event where parts of Wye River was washed away as a result of that enormous flooding event. And then just a day or two ago, Victoria recorded its hottest temperatures on record. The state experienced an extreme heat wave. Parts of the state got above 48 degrees on Tuesday. So we are seeing more frequent and more fierce and more extreme weather events as a result of a climate that is changing and a climate that needs to see more renewable energy brought into the mix. That is what we are focused on, continuing to bring those sources into the mix and work with local communities on the delivery of renewable energy and how we need to bring in more renewable energy, which is cleaner, which is secure, and helps put downward pressure on energy bills.
The climate right now is no warmer than it's been many times throughout history. Our baseline is now the lowest that carbon dioxide has been in 600 million years. As far as temperature change, the IPCC's first report of 1992 showed that the medieval warm period was warmer than the present. Well, this didn't fit the narrative, so by the time the 1996 report came out, it was a completely contrived graph called the hockey stick. So what they did was they got rid of the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age, and so instead of the graph doing this, they flattened it out, and then they added instrumental record on the end that looks like it's going way up. The point is that the people that are calling them out on it are not getting the media coverage. You know, because look, at this point there's billions of dollars going into the whole climate change narrative.
A hoax about carbon dioxide in the climate has caused a global energy and economic disaster. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Elon, yeah, look, we're on the air at the moment, just talking to Elon Musk. Yes, Jacinta Allen, she would love to go to Mars. And we would love her to go to Mars too. Yep, put her down, along with Chris Bowen, Albanese. In fact, because they are, one second. They're experienced. They've been to Uranus. Okay, thank you. See you, bye. There you are, Elon Musk, just like that. But I can't stand it. I mean, I look at this garbage. It's all based on a lie, isn't it? You have to agree. I mean, there'll be others saying, no, climate change is real. Go and see a psychiatrist or confess your sins to a priest. Do something. But don't believe that lie. It's just terrible. Terrible. Anyway, time for me to go. 3 hours, just gone like that. But I enjoyed myself very much. Love the protagonists too, by the way. Sometimes I call them the procrastinators, which is not right. That's what others do. They procrastinate. Our protagonists are very good. And the entire show. Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our guest all week. Thank you for those that have been watching us and going to the replays. Just fantastic. Can't say much more than that, except have a great weekend. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And just watch out for the police. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch you again on Monday here on The World Today.